Long before empires unified laws, currencies, or armies, something far more powerful quietly unified the ancient world. Prices, not decrees, not borders, not conquest. Costis lo. Relentless logic of trade. By the time Rome marched its legions across the Mediterranean, merchants had already done something Rome would spend centuries trying to formalize. They had turned a fragmented, violent, multilingual world into a single economic space where goods carried predictable value from one end of the sea to the other. And the people who did it weren't they were traders. Welcome to the financial historian where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand how radical this was, you have to picture the Mediterranean around 1200 years before Christ. This was not a unified world. It was chaos by modern standards. City-states rose and fell constantly. Kingdoms fought over coastlines. Pirates dominated open waters. There was no shared legal system, no common currency, no central authority capable of enforcing contracts across borders. Most people never traveled more than a few miles from home, and almost no one trusted outsiders. On paper, this should have made large-scale trade impossible. And yet, by the early first millennium BCE, goods were moving across thousands of kilometers with surprising consistency. Tin from Iberia, copper from Cyprus, cedar wood from the Levant, luxury dyes, textiles, glass, and metalwork, flowing through ports that had nothing in common politically but everything in common economically. The architects of this system were the Phoenicians. They didn't build an empire. They didn't command large armies. They didn't impose laws on conquered peoples. In fact, they never truly unified anything by force. What they did instead was far more subtle and far more durable. They built a network. Phoenician society consisted of small coastal city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Bib. These cities were vulnerable. They lacked large hinterlands. They couldn't survive prolonged wars. Their security didn't come from walls or allegiance, it came from ships, relationships, and reputation. If trade failed, they failed. That constraint shaped everything. Because when you don't have power, you have to build trust. And when you build trust at scale, you start standardizing value whether you intend to or not. The first thing Phoenician traders standardized wasn't prices. It was behavior. In a world without international courts or enforceable contracts, trade depended entirely on repeat interactions. A merchant who cheated might profit once and then disappear forever from the network. Ports talked to each other. Traders shared information. Reputation traveled faster than ships. Trust became a form of collateral. This is the part modern audiences often underestimate. Trust wasn't moral. It was economic. If you were reliable, you were included. If you weren't, you were excluded. And exclusion meant commercial death. When you don't have courts, trust becomes very expensive to lose. Once that trust network existed, prices began to align naturally, not because anyone set them, but because competition enforced them. Phoenician traders dealt primarily in commodities that had widely understood uses and relatively stable demand. Metals like copper and tin, which together made bronze. Silver measured by weight, not stamped coinage. Timber used for shipbuilding and construction. Goods whose value wasn't arbitrary, but functional. Here's where the system quietly snapped into place. If tin was cheaper in Iberia and more expensive in the eastern Mediterranean, traders moved it east. If copper was abundant in Cyprus and scarce elsewhere, ships adjusted routes accordingly. Every profitable price difference attracted competition, and competition erased the difference. This processed buying, where something is cheap and selling where it's expensive, isn't modern finance. It's arbitrage, and arbitrage is older than empires. The more Phoenician traders moved goods, the more price discrepancies collapsed. Over time, a merchant in Carthage couldn't wildly overcharge for copper if competitors knew what copper cost elsewhere. A port couldn't isolate itself economically if ships could simply bypass it. Markets disciplined prices faster than kings ever could. There was no master plan, no governing council of merchants deciding what tin should cost. Standardization emerged as a byproduct of efficiency. The traders who survived were the ones who adapted to market reality. The ones who didn't vanished. But the real advantage the Phoenicians held wasn't ships or metals. It was information. They knew where harvests had failed. They knew which mines were flooding. They knew when wars disrupted supply routes. In an era where news traveled at the speed of wind and/or controlling information was power, this allowed them to act before others even understood what was happening. They didn't just respond to prices, they anticipated them. And by doing so, they smoothed volatility across regions. Shortages in one area were offset by supply from another. Surpluses were absorbed before they collapsed local value. Over time, local producers adjusted their expectations. Farmers, miners, and craftsmen began pricing goods not just based on local conditions, but on what the wider Mediterranean market would bear. Ports became synchronized. Inland economies lagged behind, and with that, synchronization came something unprecedented. A de facto economic system that ignored political boundaries. The Phoenicians never conquered the Mediterranean, but they made it legible, predictable, tradable. Economic integration didn't follow empire. Empire followed economic integration. That's the part history textbooks often get backwards, and it's also where the story begins to turn, because once prices stabilize, once markets scale, once value becomes predictable across regions, power takes notice. Once prices began to stabilize across the Mediterranean, something subtle but irreversible happened. Trade stopped being local. Values stopped being negotiable in isolation, and markets began operating at a scale that no single city or ruler could fully control. This is where the Phoenician system reached its peak and where it quietly became vulnerable. Standardized prices made commerce faster. Faster commerce made trade more profitable, and profitable trade attracts attention. Not from other merchants, but from states. Because once value becomes predictable, it becomes taxable. And once it becomes taxable, power moves in. Greek city-states were among the first to formalize what Phoenician traders had been doing informally for centuries. They introduced stamped coinage not to invent value, but to certify it. A coin wasn't a new idea. It was silver by weight with a political guarantee attached. The market already understood what silver was worth. The state simply placed its seal on it and claimed authority over the exchange. Rome would later perfect this move. The Roman Empire didn't create Mediterranean trade. It inherited it. Ports were already connected. Prices were already aligned. Supply routes were already mapped. What Rome added was forced legions to secure trade lanes, laws to formalize contracts, and taxes to extract value from a system that merchants had built without imperial permission. This is the great irony of Phoenician success. By making markets efficient, they made them legible. And once markets are legible, they are governable. The Phoenicians never lost because their system failed. They lost because it worked too well. As states moved in, informal trust networks were replaced by formal institutions. Reputation gave way to regulation. Coinage replaced weight metal, taxes replaced negotiated exchange, and merchants who once navigated a flexible, decentralized system found themselves operating inside rigid frameworks designed to funnel value upward. The traders adapted. Some thrived, but control had shifted. Markets had unified the Mediterranean before empires ever could, but empires would ultimately decide who benefited most from that unification. And this pattern didn't end in antiquity. Fast forward to the modern world, and the architecture feels familiar, just scaled beyond recognition. There is no global government, no single authority that rules international trade, and yet prices for oil, wheat, copper, and shipping converge across continents. A drought in one region ripples through markets worldwide. A disruption in a single shipping lane raises costs thousands of miles away. Just like the ancient Mediterranean, value today is coordinated by networks, not borders. The US dollar functions much like Phoenician silver once did, not because it's imposed everywhere by law, but because markets accept it. Trust, liquidity, and information give it power long before politics does. And just as ancient traders priced goods based on Mediterranean norms, modern economies price risk, debt, and assets based on global benchmarks they don't control. Globalization didn't start with container ships or digital trading floors. It started when merchants realized inefficiency was expensive and coordination was profitable. But here's where the modern parallel turns uncomfortable. Prices today are globally synchronized. Wages are not. Goods adjust instantly to global conditions. Labor adjusts slowly, locally, and often painfully. Inflation spreads faster than income. Asset prices respond before paychecks do. And the people closest to information and liquidity financiers, large institutions, states adapt first. The system still rewards those who see price movements early and punishes those who experience them late. Nothing fundamental has changed. Only the scale. And just like in the ancient world, power didn't disappear. It repositioned itself. States learned to tax flows instead of territories. Corporations learned to arbitrage regulation instead of geography. And individuals were left navigating a system that feels abstract, distant, and increasingly out of their control. Here's the central lesson the Phoenicians unintentionally left behind. Power does not create markets. Markets create power. Those who standardize value don't need to rule openly. They influence outcomes quietly. And once systems become large enough, no single actor can fully control them, only steer them, extract from them, or shield themselves from their consequences. Empires rise believing they command markets. Markets endure by ignoring empires. This is why economic history isn't just about the past. It's about pattern recognition. Because the mechanisms that shaped ancient trade still govern modern finance, just faster, larger, and less visible. If you understand how prices converge, if you understand who benefits when they move, and if you recognize that coordination always precedes control, you stop mistaking stability for safety. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.